It's quite an occasion when liberals criticize the Supreme Court for being too activist and argue that the First Amendment's application should be limited. Yet those were exactly the reactions from the left when the court recently overturned key aspects of so-called campaign finance reform in the case of Citizens United versus FEC. With the 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court restored the freedoms of businesses, unions, and nonprofits to have their voices heard in the electoral process, freedoms that had been endangered by McCain-Feingold and other restrictions on political speech. But rather than embracing this triumph of the First Amendment, liberals began hyperventilating. MSNBC's in-house lunatic Keith Olbermann and Florida Congressman Alan Grayson both compared the ruling in Citizens United to Dred Scott, the 1857 Supreme Court case that upheld the legitimacy of slavery. The New York Times claimed that the ruling would take us back to the robber baron era. Even President Obama got into the act, saying in his weekly media address that this ruling strikes at our democracy itself. Maybe our liberal friends should look into a little Zoloft prescription. In truth, there's nothing to be worried about. All the Supreme Court's ruling does is allows more people to have their voices heard in the democratic process. It has no partisan objectives. It gives the same freedom to corporations that it does to labor unions, and the same liberties to conservative nonprofits and liberal nonprofits alike. It simply stands by a principle that should be dear to all Americans, that for the First Amendment to have any meaning, it has to be applied equally to all. Many of the more hysterical critics of this ruling claim that it will lead to moneyed interests taking over America's political process. But that claim doesn't bear scrutiny. For every wealthy interest that rises up to support an issue, there will doubtless be another one to oppose it, an insight that stems all the way back to James Madison. What's more, the American people aren't sheep. Every election year, there are plenty of well-financed campaigns that blanket the airwaves with expensive ads and then go on to lose. Money can buy you the opportunity to get your political point of view across to a wide audience, but it can't buy you the voting public's agreement. The status quo before Citizens United presented a much bigger threat to the integrity of American government than any moneyed influence. It put the government in the position of deciding what could be said about the government, not to mention when and how you can say it. If the First Amendment is designed for anything, it is to protect the freedom to speak out against elected officials. This danger was proved all too well during oral arguments in Citizens United, when Deputy Solicitor General Malcolm Stewart claimed that under the right circumstances, these election laws would have given the power to the government to ban books. If defeating power grabs that audacious isn't a priority for liberals, then they're living on a different planet and under a different constitution. With this ruling, America is moving in the right direction, back toward being a country where freedom of speech is an inalienable right and not a privilege handed out by Congress. And it's a big win for freedom, and for that, the Supreme Court deserves our thanks. That's this week's Freedom Minute.